Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. So in this video what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how the menu blueprint, the widget menu, and the VRPawn all work together to have a system. So I've been asked how this system works and how you can work with it in your VR projects. So I thought it would be good to do a breakdown of what's going on. So if we take a look and we jump into the project, with UMG, which stands for Unreal Motion Graphics, you'll see that what we've done is when we start our project, it's set up so we can press a button on the controller to load a menu that follows our hand whereabouts we are, and then we have the ability to point at it and use a pointer from our opposite hand to interact with a menu that is appearing there. We've also got a pointer, which you can see the white dot there, which moves around as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how it knows which hand it's in. For example, if I close this on the left hand, we open the right hand, and now we've got the pointer on the left, and we can interact the exact same way. So I can press the trigger, should be able to quit out, and then we can drop in, and we can take a look. So it seems like people are getting confused on how this setup is done, but it's actually quite simple, even though the menu blueprint looks quite complex. So what I want to do is I want to start with the VRPawn, as it's got two things in there that are pretty crucial for what we're doing. Those are our widget interaction right and widget interaction left. These are essentially what allow us to interact with the menu that's spawning in our hand. You'll also see that if you select one of them, they have a pointer index. This pointer index is important as it essentially tells the blueprint, the menu, whether it is our left or right hand that we're interacting with. So if we choose interaction left, it's set to 0, and then widget interaction right is set to 1. So 0 is left hand, 1 is right hand. I want you to keep that in mind because it'll be important when we go over to the menu blueprint. And what we want to do is we also want to take a look at the trace channel. We can see that this trace channel is set up as a 3D widget, and it means that what this hits, this line trace coming out of our widget interaction, can interact with anything on that 3D widget channel. A breakdown of the widget interaction, how it's set up, is it is a child of our motion controller right aim and a child of our motion controller left aim, and they use those directions to basically fire out an invisible line trace that we can use to interact with UMG in our scene. If we go to the event graph and we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that we have some events here for toggling the menu, but we don't have anything in our graph to say that our widget interaction has been triggered or activated. We'll get to that. That's going to be taking place inside of the menu blueprint. But while we're here, we want to take a look at how we actually open the menu. So we're going from the player, which has widget interactions on the hands, which are a child of the aims. And then when we press the button on our controllers as the player, we're going to toggle the menu. We basically say we're opening it up. These are functions. So if we double click it, we can actually open this function up. And you can see that we've got some more information in here. What we've got is we've got a Boolean event that says, are we activating the menu with our right hand or our left hand? And you can see that it's ticked inside of the actual event graph. So if I open the menu with my right hand, we say yes, it's true, we're going to use the right hand. And then what it does is it goes through and it checks to see if we have a menu reference before going to the actual spawn actor. We have activate menu right hand, goes down to spawn actor. But to spawn the actor, we need to check that the menu reference is set. So we have a reference in here, and it is inside of our actual VRPawn, our components list. And you can see down here in the bottom left, it says menu reference. We toggle the button, we press the button, we check to see if we have a menu which is spawned in. If we don't, then we spawn an actor, which is our menu actor, and we create a reference to it. So we're saying, okay, we spawned this actor because we didn't have one. We're going to take a reference to it and we can keep that. If we do have a reference, so let's say I've opened the menu with my left hand and then I press the button again, it's going to check to see if the menu is there, and then it's going to close the menu, which in this case goes through to the menu blueprint itself. So we spawn our menu if we don't have one, we create a reference to it. So when we press the button again, we check to see if it's valid, and we use that reference that we got to close it using a custom event. So if I open up the menu blueprint, which you can find inside of our event graph content browser, which will be down here, so menu, we can see that we have quite a bit of code in here. The close menu gets the player input. We'll take another look at this and then removes it. But what we want to do is we want to go all the way to the beginning, to the event begin play, and we want to see what it's doing. Before we take a look at the event begin play, I want us to take a look at the actual components list. So the components list are stuff that this blueprint contains. And in this case, we've got a default scene route, which is basically working like a location and a parent. We then have a Niagara particle system component called menu laser. And then we have a widget component, which is what we use to display our widget class. So I'll do videos on creating new widget blueprints and widget classes and setting these all up in a later video. But for now, this is essentially what we use to visualize our UMG menu that is attached to the hand. So inside of this component, we have a widget class, and that is down here, which contains the visual style for our hand menu. And then in our graph, it's coded to be, if we press this button on click, reset the orientation, if we press the restart button, we're going to open the level again, and then we've got quit game. So that's it for the actual UMG. It's very simple, but in the menu, we reference that so we can interact with it. We can have a visualization that we can see. After that, we've got a cursor, which is a child of our widget menu. And this cursor essentially acts as our dot, so it gets our line trace hit. And then we can see whereabouts it is on the menu if we were to use it that way. So we can move it around. It's basically a visual representation of where our line trace from our controller is hitting. Cursor. So if we go to event graph, what we can see is we've got a whole bunch of code. We've got a whole bunch of code that is doing a bunch of different things. And we can see here that we've got stuff like play animation, open menu, handles, toggle between non-menu hand, acting as a laser pointer in a menu, thumbstick, input menu control, rotate widget towards camera, move the widget to comfortable location. This is all cool. And we also have this bit down here, which is our input stuff, which we'll get to. But there's two things in here that you can't really see off the bat unless you're looking for them that are really, really crucial. So what are those? These functions right here. So we have set widget interaction reference, or three things. We've got get widget interaction component, and then set motion controller reference. So if we go to the event begin play now, and we're going to take a look through the whole logic, we'll kind of walk through it. We have our event begin play. So in our VRPawn, when we press our button to toggle a menu, we fire the function, and then we spawn the actor. When the actor spawns, it creates this blueprint menu, and then it runs this event begin play. If you've done blueprints before, you know the standard logic. But for those who don't know, that's what we're dealing with. It goes from the player opening the menu to spawning the blueprint to playing the event begin play. This doesn't fire until this blueprint exists inside the level, at which point we get the player controller and we enable input. We say inside of this blueprint, we can have inputs, and then we add the mapping context. So this uses the enhanced input system, which is a modular system for adding interactions or button presses, keyboard presses, that kind of thing to blueprints. And it's fantastic and it's great to work with. I recommend learning it if you haven't. I do have a video on the channel. But what this does is it gets our player controller, it looks for the enhanced input local player subsystem, and then we add a mapping context to it. In this case, the mapping context is input mapping context underscore menu with a priority of 2, because it's not as important as everything else in the game, but we're not on about enhanced input system all that much, so don't worry about that. The mapping context itself contains our user inputs. So you can see here we've got a whole bunch of different button presses, 4 different HMDs that we can use inside of this blueprint. After that, we then get the prepare component references. So this comment is saying that we get our set widget interaction reference and set our motion controller reference. What this is inside of here, we have a couple of references that we need to get. One is, are we using the left or right hand? And what motion control as well. So we start with the set widget interaction reference. We can open this up, and what this does is it gets our player pawn. So this actor is basically looking for our player, and it's checking to see if we have a widget interaction. By default we do. We've got 2 of them, at which point it checks the length and sees if it's greater than 0. This is basically saying if we have a widget interaction, we're seeing it here and we're going to fire true. If we don't, we're going to say print the string warning, no widget interaction component was found. Menu interaction will fail. We can't interact with a menu if we don't have a widget interaction. So at that point, we store a reference to how many widget interactions are in our player. In this case, it's 2, so we get an array value of 2 for widget component or widget interaction reference, which it then loops through. We have our array. We're looping through that array and firing this section of code the number of times that our array has variables, and we're getting the pointer index. We can get the pointer index from the widget interaction because this variable is a widget interaction type. So we get the pointer index. That's basically looking at our widget interaction on our hand and saying, are we right or left-handed? That's what we're using this for. At which point, if it is 0, it means we're using our left hand. So we store a reference to our widget interaction left hand or the right hand. So if it's not 0, it means it's a value of 1. So it's going to go false. So we're right-handed. If it fails, we just print that print string and we're all good. We go event begin play. We get the widget interactions from our player. We check to see if there is more than 0. If there is, we store those into an array. We loop through it and get the pointer index to see if we're right or left-handed. Now in the event graph, we then go to our motion controller reference, which we pretty much do the exact same thing. We get our player pawn. However, we check to see if a motion controller component is detected instead. If the length is greater than 0, it means we have a motion controller. In our case, we've got 2, one for left and right-handed, and we store a reference to those as well in a variable array. So that variable type is motion controller. So we're storing our left and right controllers from our player inside of this, and then we're looping through them. In this case, we get our motion controller source. So this is telling our controller or a game whether we're left or right-handed, or in this case, whether it's the left aim or right aim. So just so you're aware where this is coming from, if we go to our VRPawn and we search for motion controller right aim component and left aim, we can scroll down and you can see here that we have this motion source enum. Pretty sure it's an enum. If we drop it down, you can see that we've got a bunch of different options to choose from. In this case, we're set to right aim and left aim, and that's what the menu checks for. So the menu is saying, okay, this component in our player is set to left aim. If it's true, we store a reference to the motion controller aim. However, we're not just getting a reference to this and storing it, we're checking to see if the motion controller source is equal to the left or right aim. So this is where the Boolean comes down from our player. So activate menu hand right. So our player spawns our menu and we tell it whether it's left or right-handed. So in this function, we can store a reference to the hand that we're using. So if the activated menu hand equals right, we're going to get the right motion controller aim reference. And if it's not, it means it's just the left one. Cool. So both of those are stored here. So we have our motion controller aim reference, and then our widget interaction reference left or widget interaction reference right. We tell the blueprint or the actor that it can have input actions. This way we can interact with stuff inside of the widget. And then we have this section here, which basically gets a reference to the motion controller, and then motion controller opening the menu, and a reference to the widget interaction. I'm not worried about spelling, that's all good, you guys get the gist. At which point we then open the menu. So this plays a little animation that scales the menu up from our hand after spawning it in. So play open menu widget, we get our widget component here, and then we get the relative scale, which is 0.08 all the way through, and then we set a reference to that. So we're getting our scale, at which point we then update the relative scale. So we get the widget, get relative scale, and we use this timeline here. So this timeline node, if we open it up, to scrub between 5 seconds, or it's more accurate to be timeline is 5 seconds long, but we're just saying go from a value of 0, 0 to in 0.2 seconds a value of 1. So we're saying in 0.2 seconds we want this menu to be full screen, and then it can just do its own thing. At which point the animation finishes, and then we fire this section down here. So this section itself is used to do the cursor. So this cursor, make it attached to the UMG so it doesn't move off there, and it's only displayed where it's needed. Otherwise, you could point at a wall with the menu open and the cursor would be on the wall when you don't really need that. You just want it on the UMG. So we get the widget, we get the user widget object, and then we get the paint space geometry. So this in the menu is getting whereabouts it is actually on the UMG. From there, we get the absolute size, so we can see the size of the UMG menu, and then we limit the axis for that. And then we've got this section here. So when the reverse timeline finishes, which we haven't spoke about yet, it makes sure the widget interaction component is returned to its initial hierarchy and destroys ourselves. We'll come back to this bit. So now we have an event tick. So an event tick fires every frame, and it allows us to update what we're doing. In this case, we're moving the widget to a comfortable location. That is going to be in our hand. So we've ran all of this on begin play. We're getting our cursor location, and this is all firing in the background. So this section here changes the location of the actor itself. So we've got our motion controller aim reference, which we're getting from this function up here, and we're getting the world location and the camera location for the player. I'm not going to go too in depth in the math. We don't really need to, but we get the motion controller location and the widget in here, and we move it to that world location. So this is what allows us to follow our hand. So we can have the menu distance towards camera. We can modify this to move it forward or back, but by default it's pretty good. So this section is choosing the location of the actor. It's the widget component, not the actor. That's important to point out. This widget is moved around the level in the scene. After that, we rotate the widget towards the camera. So in this case, if the player spawns a menu and this UMG is facing the opposite direction, we use the next set of code to rotate this around to make it face the player. So this is what we use the final look at rotation for. We get the widget, we get the world location that it is, and then we get the camera manager, and then the player camera. So we make it look at the player camera, where we set the world rotation. And this section does exactly what it says. It determines the logic between non-menu hand acting as a laser pointer when aiming at the menu, and then the thumbstick on the menu hand moving the cursor. So we've got two different sections. We have one that is controlling the thumbstick movement. So if I want to jump in, and then we open up the menu with our hand, you can see I can use the thumbstick on the controller to move that cursor. Part of this code controls that, and then another part of it controls the widget or the VFX for the pointer to where we're hitting. So we're just using the event tick to do a couple of different things. So the first one, or this first section here, what we're doing is we're checking to see if the hand menu is right or left. So in the player, we tell it, is the active menu hand the right hand or is it the left hand? And in this case, it's doing the opposite. It's getting the opposite widget component to the menu hand. So if we're opening it with our right hand, we get a reference to the left hand to control the widget interaction. Spawn in the right hand, because we press that button, we can now interact with it with our left. And then we do the other thing, do it the other way, it uses the other hand. After that, once it's visible, we check to see if we're over a hit test visible widget. Widgets have collisions, just like everything else. And you can see there we've got window visibility set, hit test invisible, and then visible. And in this case, what it's doing is it's checking to see if we're pointing, if our widget interaction component, that is part of our hand that we're pointing at, is over the UMG, the widget interaction component. So if it's hitting this, then we're going to say true, at which point it fires a sequence. It's important to know that a sequence always fires from then 0, runs that code, and then goes to then 1, and then we do once. So this is enabling our laser pointer input. So by default, we have our menu laser, and it is set to invisible. So the visibility for this component is disabled, at which point we turn it on. So we're saying, okay, we're going to do this line of code once. We're going to set our menu laser visible. We're going to check to see if it is on the right or left hand, which we're doing here. So the get widget interaction component. And we're going to attach it. And then we're going to attach the widget interaction component to the motion controller. So you could have a widget interaction as part of the player list here. But in this example, we don't do that. The menu laser or the widget interaction exists here. Very confusing. We've got stuff in the player that we're moving to the actor or the menu actor, and then we end up moving it back. So this section is basically referring to this bit when we close. So if we close our menu, we move our widget component. So this section here, when we close our menu, so we press the button again, we remove the mapping context from our player, and it finishes playing the animation to make it smaller. Then we check to see if we're going backwards, which we are doing because we're playing this in reverse. If it's true, we then move our widget interaction component back to our motion controller aim reference, and then we attach those and then destroy the menu blueprint. So this one, if we're using the right hand, we get the widget interaction component and then we attach it to our motion controller aim reference. We then follow this all the way down where we get to a do once that we're resetting. So we'll go through these in order and then we'll come back to that. So from the sequence, we then do them one. So tick laser pointer input. What this is doing is we get our activated menu right hand or left hand, and we're getting the opposite. So we're getting the opposite hand that we're in, and we get the widget interaction component. So we open the menu with our right hand, we're getting the left widget interaction component, and then in here we have a little event graph, get the last hit result, and in this case we're looking from the widget interaction to get the return value impact point. So when our widget interaction overlaps something, our little invisible line trace, where is it hitting? And we get that impact point out. So that comes out of here, and then we set our cursor location to that point in the world. So wherever it's hitting on our menu, we move our cursor component to that location. We then get the world location of our widget interaction component, which if you remember is attached to our hand. And we get our Niagara system. So this Niagara system is our menu laser, and it contains two vector values, one for the start of the line and one for the end of the line. And this is where we set those. So we're getting the widget interaction component from our hand. We're getting the world location. We're saying 0.0. If you've worked with splines, you'll know what these are. 0.0 is the start of that line from our menu laser effect. And then it uses pointer.array, user.pointArray. And then at the end, we do index 1, we get the impact point to tell it where that goes. So if I open up this menu laser VFX, we can go in here and we can see on the left here, we've got a user parameters. And inside of this, we have a pointer array with float data containing two locations. So if I move this value up, you can see that pointer gets longer. And that's essentially what we're doing. We have this index value here, 0, is our starting point on our hand. And then this one down here, our first point, because it's an array, is our end location. That's where it's going to hit. And all we're doing is we're passing our variables from our motion controller widget interaction component to this VFX so it knows where to go. So on tick, we get our opposite hand, we get the widget interaction component and get the hit result to set the cursor, and then we get the world location to set our start VFX point of location, and then the end point from the impact point of our widget interaction component. So if we go back, we've looked at the top two sections here. Oh, don't want to break that. We've looked at these two sections here. The top one is our laser pointer impact point. We're attaching the motion controller, the widget interaction component to our motion controller aim reference. And then we get the tick laser pointer which sets our pointer line. After that, we check to see if we're over hit test visible widget. If we're not, then it means we must be using our thumbstick. So we use enable thumbstick input. This fires on do once as well, because we only need this line of code to activate once, so it knows whereabouts it's attached to essentially. So in this case, we set the menu laser to invisible. Because we're using the thumbstick to move around our menu, we don't need to see that pointer coming out of the controller, so we don't have to show it. And then at which point we check to see what hand we're using, and we get the widget interaction component. In this case, what it does is it detaches this component from our hand, or the widget interaction component from our hand, and attaches it to the cursor itself. So essentially taking it from one blueprint, we're attaching it to our menu blueprint's cursor, and then we're setting the location to move it back slightly. So what it's doing is we essentially have a sphere with a line that's going through it. We can't see this pointer, but it's kind of using it like a little joystick that we can use to figure out whereabouts we're pressing. At which point we can then update our cursor location. So we do this by getting our cursor reference and the relative location. We do a whole bunch of math to then set the relative location of it clamped to the UMG that is on the screen. And to do that, we actually get our input action menu cursor right. So in our input mapping context underscore menu, we have a cursor left and a cursor right input control, which is set to use our 2D axis thumbsticks. And then we read that value through these nodes here, get input action menu cursor right, to get the X and the Y axis for where we're pushing our thumbstick. And this is what we use to determine whether we're using the left or right hand, to add that in and make it go to the relative location on the widget. So let's say we switch from these. So what's happening is we have these linked to the do once. So if we use the thumbstick, it's going to reset the pointer. And then if we use the pointer, it's going to reset the thumbstick. So it allows us to toggle back and forth between each one. And then we can go from there. And now we have our close menu. So we get the player controller enhanced input system. So if our player destroys the menu, it closes it down and runs the same thing. But before we do that, what we want to do is we want to have a look at this bit here. So this is actually our inputs. So enhanced input action, menu interact left. Whether it's started, we just press the pointer key. So widget interaction left, which is inside of our player. If we press this button, we're going to say act like a mouse click, and then we're going to click our UMG. And then we do the same thing if we're using the right controller. Or the right controller is reference to the interaction reference right. So there is quite a lot going on here. It's not as complex as it looks. I hope I've explained it okay. But basically we have our VRPawn, which has widget interaction aim, widget interaction right, widget interaction left, and then we use the player to spawn our menu actor. We tell it whether it's left or right handed, at which point we get a reference to it inside of that blueprint after setting up our inputs, and then we play our animation to scale up and open. I could keep going. I want to wrap up there before I start going around in circles, because I'm most likely to do that. But if you have any questions, make sure to check out the Discord over there most days and most time. And if you'd like to support the channel to get more videos like this and see a lot of the series videos that aren't out on YouTube, make sure to head over to Patreon to do that. It helps a lot and it supports the channel a lot. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do this. And just want to say a big thank you to everyone whose name is listed at the end here. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.